Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining today. Our webinar today is called Retail's Cautious Restart, How COVID-19 Will Choose Retail's Winners and Losers. My name is Greg Busick, President of IHL Group, and we're thankful today to have this webinar sponsored by Ceridian. And from Ceridian, we've got John Orr, SVP of Retail for Ceridian, that's going to join. And say hello, John.
Everyone. Yeah, just a couple, little bit about Ceridian. If for those that aren't familiar with Ceridian or familiar with us today, we're a global human capital management software company that makes work life better through the use of intelligent HR solutions. We're a culture-driven organization with a combination of startup agility and innovation with legacy and deep domain operational expertise. We have over 4,200 customers worldwide across more than 50 countries, with about 3.1 million employees live on Dayforce, with the most use from the associates with the mobile. We have 872 customers in the retail and hospitality, accommodations, and food and beverage industry. And with that, Greg, we'll pass it back to you, and thank you and IHL and everyone attending today.
All right, thanks, John. Okay, today in our broadcast, you're going to have the opportunity to do questions, and to do those questions, you go down to your control panel, and there's a question bar, and you can go ahead and enter your questions in that area. We'll answer those questions throughout the day at the end of the webinar. The number one question we get all the time is, when will the slides and the recording be available? Those will be available tomorrow on our website at ihlservices.com, and you'll have the opportunity to get those and download those then. Second, for those that are IHL clients, we will update the forecast data that we're showing, the forecast spreadsheet that will be available on the My IHL portal, which some of you call Sophia. By the end of the day tomorrow, that'll be available. And with that, we want to start off with a poll. When is the next time you plan to travel on an airplane? Within the next 30 days, more than 30 days out, not until 2021, or not until a vaccine is available? We'll give you a few seconds to answer that question. Results are coming in. Okay, give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's share the results. And it looks like about half of you are planning to do so before October 1st, most of that group over the summer. And 50% not until a vaccine or 2021. Wow, that's a big group and a big difference there. And I think we'll talk about some of those issues as we go forward. Now, before we get started, just to say up front, I'm probably going to offend just about everybody in the slides ahead, depending on your view, but wanted to go back to the things that we did last webinar that were really well received on just kind of how to interpret data when you see data presented in a news source, or even presented to you in the context of your business. The questions to ask yourself so that you can see a bigger picture or a more complete picture of what's going on. So the question to ask about data: what does this number mean that they are saying? What does the opposite of that headline mean? So if it says 20% is doing something, that means 80% is not doing that. If you can get a look at it, get a look at the sample, the demographics, how many people, what was the N, how big was the sample, where was the sample taken? Was it just people who bothered to answer their phone, for instance? That can have a big impact on the results. Is there an agenda from the data originator or publishing source? Do they benefit from this data? Do they have a political bent one way or another? Do you lean one way or another, and that's why you're looking at that source? That all plays into what you see in the data, things there. Next one, read past the headline and the first paragraph. I've shared in previous webinars how I won the Senior Olympics gold medal, but I could write it in such a way that it was this amazing headline, an amazing story, and made it look like a full-on Olympic gold medal there. So always read past the headline in the first paragraph if that data is important to you. And then always follow the money. Who makes money off of this data or the headline? And then understand that a negative headline is 10 times more clicks and 10 times more eyeballs than a positive headline is. The more sensational it is, the more it is a multiplier there. So a Cat 5 hurricane is better than a hurricane. And the way they spin the data has a major impact, but always follow the money and who's making money during something. And that really applies to what we're talking about in terms of the COVID data. And your perspective is based on where you live, your health situation for your family, your news sources, and your political bent. Understand that good people can have different views based on all of those things. One of the biggest frustrations for me is watching friendships and family member agreements just disintegrate because people have one view versus the other. Neither one has a complete picture, and neither one will hear out the other side of what's going on. Understand that our media is culpable in feeding our separation. It's not just the Russians or Facebook. Once again, follow the money. Our news organizations are making a ton of money right now because they can charge upwards of 8 to 10 times more for the ads that show on the nightly news or on the cable news programs right now because of COVID. Let me just give you an example of one that is just illustrates where you live and how you bend politically based on the same data. So the COVID data from Johns Hopkins and the CDC is exactly the same. This is a poll from CNBC, and you look at the impact of how people are answering to the question, will there be a second wave of coronavirus in the US this year? You can see up here, Democrat and lean Democrat, highly leaning to yes, definitely, or yes, probably. In fact, I'll show the data here in a second, but for Republicans and lean Republicans, it's more towards the lower side of this. And I did the math for you. Those that lean Democrat or were Democrats said yes, 99% maybe or yes, that there will be a second wave. For the Republicans, 79% maybe or no, there won't be a second wave. So you can see where you lean politically, how things are viewed, your family situation, where you live has a major impact on your perception of the same question and the same data that's in place. And this really starts to play out when you start to look at the COVID-19 data and what's being shared by the media. The typical approach is we have some threatening music, dun, 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 breaking news, and we're given one of these numbers. We're given the fact that number of confirmed cases in New York, the popular 1 in 55 people have died, the total deaths, or we get the data for the United States as total number of deaths or total number of cases nationwide. But they're only sharing part of the data because of the sensationalism of it to get your attention. You know, I heard a quote today that said, hey, the end of the world is coming, tune in at 6. And that's kind of the approach of the news. So let's take a look at the data a little bit deeper here. Let's add the population and the number of confirmed cases per location. What we see is in New York today, 1.81% of the population is a confirmed case in the state of New York. Now, we know from antibody testing that's likely much higher in New York City, but let's just go with the approved data that's been released there. As you go down the list, you can see in Florida, California, Washington, Tennessee, Texas, and Arizona, those numbers are much, much lower here. And what gets juxtaposed in the news is, oh my goodness, Texas is opening. Texas is opening. It's a big state. Oh, we're going to have this huge increase in cases. And that's just simply not the case because we're not starting from the same place here and the same density of things that are going forward. In New York, we have 1 in 55 people who have tested positive there. In Texas, it's 1 in 591 people, over 10 times, almost 11 times less density of cases per population there. And then the same thing holds true in terms of deaths, but we're not presented that information. Now let's look at it a little bit further. Let's add hospitalizations in here. In New York City, it's 1 in 4.6 confirmed cases is hospitalized. Does that hold elsewhere? Well, no. You go down to Tennessee, it's 1 in 12, or in Arizona, 1 in 9. And California, Washington, Texas don't release the hospitalization numbers right now on that. So we don't have that data for there. But for the other cases, once again, you look at it and it's 1 in 12 versus 1 in 4.6 cases here. And actually a higher percentage of the population has been tested in the state of Tennessee than has been tested in the state of New York at this point. And yet we're at 1 in 12 here. So the data is different based on where you live and what's going on. Let's take it a next step further. This is the chances of you not being hospitalized or not dying based on state. And the news would never give you this information because it changes the narrative completely. And that is the fact that even in New York, the worst place in the United States, you have an average person walking around has a 99.61% chance of not getting a case of COVID-19 that is severe enough for them to have to go into the hospital, and a 99.859% chance of not dying. Okay, when you look down further, it's even bigger when you go down to some of these other cases. In Tennessee, 99.996% chance of not dying and 99.978% chance of not being hospitalized by a case. So when you put all the data together, this is the complete picture of the data. Now, it's funny when you do this, you can look at the data two different ways. Okay, there are some that are going to look at it from this perspective and look at the population and the fact that there's a chance, and there's others that are going to look at this and say it's highly unlikely. So I equate this to my celebrity crush when I was in high school and college was Morgan Fairchild. And if I looked at this data, if a rational person would look at this data, they would look at it and say, you have no chance of ever dating Morgan Fairchild. But I looked at this point over here and said, ooh, so you're saying there's a chance. And that is the difference. Our perspective of where we live, our health situation, our family's health situation, our situation in terms of what news we look at, or our political bent, is greatly impacting the world that we're looking at. Now let's look at the justification for the lockdown, which was the reproduction rate of the virus, where one person that gets the virus, how many people do they give it to? Well, this is where we were on March 20th. Okay, so in New York, one person gave it to 1.23 people, et cetera, there, and as high as Texas at 1.35, there in California at 1.34. Let's look at the data as of today. You can see it is far below the numbers that we had there. So if someone gets it, they're infecting less than one person. So the data is going down. The likelihood of this increasing is going down as this stays below 1. That was the whole key to this, is because we did not want to overrun our hospitals, and that was the justification for that. Now let's look at my favorite question in all of this is when somebody says, hey, this is just like a bad flu. And of course, what gets presented, because the media and the news is created out of New York City, where things have been really hit hard, it's a preposterous question that this is just like a bad flu there. However, let's look at it at these other states. So you can see here in total in the US, 90,000 COVID-19 deaths. The 2018-2019 flu period, which is basically October to April, October of 18 to April of 19, is the time period for a typical flu season there. We had 34,000 total for that. So let's look at other states. Florida, we have maybe 2/3 as many COVID deaths to date. In Washington, we just went over the flu deaths number there. So it's about even, looking at about even or a little bit higher in those states for COVID than the flu. So the argument still holds to a certain degree there. Well, let's look a little bit further. Let's look at Tennessee and Texas. Okay, what happens there? Well, what happens there is the flu deaths are 5 times more than what's happening with COVID-19. Different state, different location, separate data. And that's the key thing here is people got to get along in their organizations and look at things and say, hey, here is a situation where we may be looking at the data differently based on where our employees are, based on where our stores are, and our decisions on reopening and what may happen there has to be dictated by that complete view, not just the view that we're getting from one side of the media there. Next, we get presented this chart on coronavirus outbreak, and shows the U.S. as being by far the worst, and that gets presented in our data here. Well, there's only 2 problems with this data. Number one is this data can only go up. It's only cumulative. So even if you look at the South Korea line that's been essentially flat for a long, long time there, it's still going up. It cannot go down. The second piece of this is it's not adjusted by population. So if you divide by population, is the US still the top place for infections as of today? And the answer to that is no. We are number 5 when it comes to cases per million when you compare everybody apples to apples. And we're number 7 when it comes to death. But I want to bring your attention to 2 things because these have been, on one side has been pressed heavily in the news. So Sweden, for instance, if you look at Sweden in terms of the cases per million, Sweden has been vilified because there has not been a lockdown. And if you looked at the news stories on Sweden from anywhere outside of Sweden, you would be told ad nauseum that the deaths are climbing, the deaths are far worse than they expected, etc. there. But you'll notice that the death rate is only about 2/3 of that of the United States, and about just about 52, 53% when it comes to what we're looking at Spain or Ireland there. The other one is, who knew that Belgium was the worst place in the world to get COVID-19 in terms of deaths per capita there? I haven't seen a single story. Raise of hands. How many of you have seen a single story about how bad the situation is in Belgium? And that's the problem. Data that when we only get a piece of it skews us to look at different things. So what does it look like in the United States when we start looking at the prospects of reopening? And that's what you have here. This is the curve, and this is data that I keep track of. The link will be at the bottom and it'll be on all the charts. This is the data that I keep track of daily on the changes per day in cases and in deaths in the United States. And you, as you can see, from March 21st, and then we've got a 7-day moving average on that. That has been declining separately or significantly for the last 2 months, and is down to about 1.3% change per day of cases there. By any indications, this is flattening the curve. The curve is going down dramatically of what's going on in terms of risks to our hospitals, to everything else on a nationwide basis there. So this is our COVID data here, and you're welcome to look at the data. Once again, that the individual spreadsheet that I keep track of from the Johns Hopkins data is there on that link, and then it'll be sharing that with you. So what does that mean economically when we go through? And it really comes down to the fact that the remediation efforts that have come from our governments have really made the problem worse in many cases because of the lockdown. Now, we've gone through and discussed the different problems with the PPP and stuff like that in previous webinars, but just for review, we have 3 different priorities that are competing with each other with the CARE Act, the CARE Act that came out. First of all, the PPP plan was designed to keep employees on payroll. It was driven from a Republican side. in and of itself would have been a fantastic program if it could have been rolled out better there. But we had a second piece of that. We expanded the unemployment benefits with an extra $600 per week, which is basically $15 an hour extra, which is actually more than what many people were making to begin with. This was not stratified by income going in. So what it did is it created for unemployed people, they're making 1.5 to 2 times more than they were when they were employed in many of the service positions that we have in retail and hospitality. And particularly for small businesses, that has created a major, major mess. And then on top of that, we incentivized the banks based on they got 5% of the loan value. So when you hear of most of the headaches regarding the PPP program, it was based on the fact that these large companies were getting loans and the little guys were not getting through, which was what the program was designed for. Well, when you incentivize the banks to where they get 5% rather than a fixed fee per loan, all of a sudden a $10 million loan for a public company looks a lot better to them than a little loan to a small mom and pop retailer. The end result is those guys got the money. It's been a real mess in that, and we've created this competing thing that has created this massive unemployment that we're seeing in the United States. This was the last major unemployment things earlier in April. There were 14.8% unemployment rate. Canada, very similar program in the sense of expanding unemployment and giving, in this case, $500 a week for 16 weeks there. That was their approach to this, and that their unemployment is now 9.8, and I believe somebody else told me that today it's upwards of 13% based on that particular program. But I want to bring your attention down to these guys down at the bottom here and what they did differently. Germany, Netherlands, and France, as well as Australia, Denmark, and New Zealand, they all guaranteed the payroll of the existing company. So if you were employed, you would still continue to be employed by your employer. They guaranteed upwards of 90% of the value of that payroll to each of those businesses to keep people on board. The end result is unemployment is far less, and they will be able to recover their economy in terms of the supply of labor back to their organizations as well as the demand side much faster. So when we look at the recovery, it's our expectations in the US and Canada, it will be more like a boomerang effect, a Nike symbol type of impact there, versus in these other areas, it will be down not as deep, but not going up as much, but they're going to be recovering there. So the growth rates are going to be favoring the US and Canada long term there, but in the short term, these other countries are going to be able to get back to normal much faster because of the programs from their individual countries. When we look at the data, this was the initial data that came out after the end of March in terms of the impact, and you'll see here that leisure and hospitality and retail trade represent nearly 10 million of the 20 million jobs here lost originally here. So we're upwards of 50% of the total industry, of the total layoffs in the first round of things. As well, when you look at it by age, the younger folks who are often the people that are on the front line of retail and hospitality trade, they got hit harder than anybody else by far with unemployment because of COVID-19. And further, education has a major impact on things as well. The more likely your job was to be able to work from home, the more likely you were able to keep your job, and obviously the less risk of getting COVID-19. However, the essential workers could not work in their homes, and they had to be forced outside their homes. So if you look at the education level here, 67% of those with high school age or less are having to work outside the home. This also skews racially and ethnically higher. And it also, because of the racial and ethnic situations where you have more multi-generational homes there, those people come home and they've got older parents or grandparents that are living in their homes. And if they catch it outside, they come home. And that's why you see, in many ways, a big difference between races and ethnicities of cases, as well as the number of people that are dying, not because of the color of their skin. It's their family living situation and their work situation and going outside the home and coming back in. That's where we have a lot of impacts here. But when you look at this going forward, you can see that a lot of our retail workers here are impacted and do not have the luxury of working from home as a result of that. The last just general economic before we get into the stores data in particular is this particular sheet, which looks at risk professionals about what they're most concerned about. And I think it's interesting to note that it's not another outbreak that's down at the bottom here. It is a prolonged global recession that they're most concerned about. Now, why is it that they're not concerned about a global outbreak? Is it because they're heartless and things? Not really. Everybody was prepared and had a contingency plan for a hurricane or for an earthquake in one area or a tornado in another area that would affect their companies. No one had a contingency plan for the entire world economy and supply chain to just shut down. But I can bet you that all of these companies are preparing for that for the future, and will have that in place going forward on how to do things, how to get their supplies, etc. That'll be in place for the next time the next pandemic or a second wave comes. And that's not as much a concern as the economic concerns of a prolonged recession and not having demand for the products that are in place. So just different pieces of data, general economic things. So with that, let's turn to look at what's going on with stores and the impact of this, the devastating impact this has had on retail. The impact is devastating on total stores. This was our projections, and in the slides that we give out afterwards, it all have all the assumptions and what went into this if you guys want them. But we're estimating currently nearly 300,000 stores nationwide that are going to be lost and shut down as a result of COVID-19 and the lockdowns associated with that. Heavily affecting the small, medium folks. Over 254,000 of the 299,000 stores are going to be in chains with fewer than 9 stores. That has been devastating. And I'm going to show a slide of the transfer of wealth from small companies to big companies as a result of this. Jim Cramer came out and said last night that this really was the lockdown was kind of almost like an act benefiting the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world at the expense of the small businesses. In fact, you could argue in 2 months' time, we did about 3 years worth of damage that happened in the 90s when Walmart grew and took away business from Main Street America. COVID-19 did that in 2 months, what took a decade, half a decade to do in the 90s. And that's the biggest thing. Now, the piece of this that's positive is they're going to recover. Not the same companies, but they get replaced very fast because the dream of having a restaurant or opening a boutique is still there for a lot of Americans. And I agree with Scott Galloway from NYU, who said there's never been a worse time to be a small business than right now. And in 6 months, there will never be a better time to start a small business than at that time because of so many going out of business, but then the opportunities moving forward. As percentages, this is the percentages of each one of those things that we think we're going to lose here. This is the breakout for FDCM here. This is an increase of 2,800 stores. This is among enterprise, the larger retailers. 2,800 stores, that's food, drug, convenience, mass merchants, and super centers is that group. Your general retail includes everybody from your mall-based stores, your clothing, apparel, but it also includes electronics and books and DIY and sports and furniture. That's all in the general retail, and which is going to get hit hard, as we have already seen with Pier 1 and J. Crew and Macy's and Sears and Penny's announcements there, and then restaurant chains with hospitality that we're going to see. But this is, once again, this is limited to 50 or more locations. It's not all the same across the country, though, and so I've done the work to look at the impact of store closures and the total shutdown impact there in 10 states because of the restrictions and the level of lockdowns. Are taking the brunt by far of all the store closures that are happening. So we have California #1, all the way down to North Carolina here. We're talking 63, keep hitting my mouse, 63% of the store closures from those 10 states. There, 172 billion lost, 189,000 stores. Now there's an asterisk by California. California would be far worse if it wasn't for the senior meal plan, which is a brilliant idea where seniors can get up to 3 meals a day from small restaurants. If that wasn't in there, we would have probably lost 70,000 retailers and restaurants from California in this 4-month period. So these states are going to see the brunt of things going forward. I'm going to skip through these 2 slides for the sake of time. They'll be in the deck for you. This is a view of retail sales. So just going back to 2019, we were booming there. Things were moving pretty good, 3.5%. Got even better in February. In total, we were up 7.5%. Restaurants were up 9.3% year to year in February there. Then March happened, and all of a sudden things started to slow. We went from being up 9.3% comparative to down 24.6% there. And then the April results came out and got even worse. And so we went from up 7.5% as a February year-to-year comparison in February to a down 18.4% April comparatively year-to-year, especially soft goods in particular, and then the leisure casinos, cruises that are not on this chart were just decimated for things here and just really, really tough. And where we are today overall is we're down about 5.4% without the pure play growth that's in there from a year-to-year standpoint. And I'm going to share where our forecast is going forward. For those of you that have been following these forecasts, this has not changed in terms of overall. However, we have adjusted some categories based on the April actuals that came out from the Census Bureau. So that data is here, minus 6.9% in the U.S. As we look at across a world, we're looking at about $780 billion lost over the 2009 actuals that we had in play. Now that's 780 billion out of 14 trillion dollars in play there. So that's a change from the previous. I'm going to skip through those. And I mentioned the transfer of wealth that happened from GMS to hospitality, and GMS and hospitality to food, drug, mass, and convenience. The North America data, in North America, we're estimating about $125 billion more is shifting from the malls and the restaurants to the food, drug, mass merchants, and convenience stores going forward for this year. But it's not just there, it's also a shift from small retailers to large retailers. And because Walmart could be open and sell sporting goods and clothing, but the small retailer couldn't be open to sell that, that has shifted a lot of demand and a lot of the buying over to these larger retailers. And that's having a devastating impact along with just the lockdown. It's the rules are different for the big guys who cross over and have multiple categories or were deemed essential. Once again, as I mentioned before, many times, the gas prices, if they stay down, that is going to add another stimulus because of just the volume of the number of cars. Basically, it's about $2 billion for every penny sustained difference $2 billion more in consumers' wallets, and that goes into retail spend. So if that stays at least $1 below where it was last year, we're going to see upwards of $500 to $540 billion coming into retail as people start to drive more going forward. So in terms of recovery, we didn't change this from the last one. The light blue line is the line that is the overall looking at retail and hospitality, restaurants. This doesn't include your casinos and lodging and entertainment in this from a recovery standpoint. We're looking at between 2000, right around first quarter of 2022, where we think we'll get back to 2019 levels. In the food, drug, merchants, those guys, really high spike, that's come down and is getting much more reasonable growth there. The general merchandise folks, really strong dip, and that's going to come back slowly, really slowly, and we don't see that recovering to current levels till 2023 at best. So let's talk about reopening. This chart shows the states that have some sort of partial reopening, but that doesn't really explain retail. The number of places that are really open for stores, and particularly stores you can walk in, is still really small. There's about 5 states that still haven't opened up to be able to go shopping, Hawaii being one of those, Connecticut being one of those, Michigan being one that's really contentious right now, and New York, where you can walk into stores, into general retail stores. So there's Aurora Vision, or Aura Vision, excuse me, has a nice tracker. It doesn't present well here, but you can go by state, by country, and look at the lockdowns and when retail stores are open. So we would refer you to that to take a look at that. So let's talk about reopening now. The length of the lockdown, what's going to determine the speed of the recovery is the length of the lockdown in your state, and the benefits that if you're a small retailer, the benefits that you offer your employee from a medical benefits, if you give those people will come back much faster and less likely to just stick on the unemployment there. Your relationships with the employees there, the generosity of the unemployment benefits in your state. Some states it's at about the wages they were making. In other states it's twice as much there. Next, related to that, the ineptness of the unemployment office to actually give out the checks to begin with. The more inept the unemployment office, the more likely you're going to get employees back working faster. The strictness of implementing the social distancing in the states and in those locations, and how you perceive those as a retailer. And I'm going to show you some data here next. And then certainly any news of a vaccine, a therapeutic, or adversely a second wave will have a negative impact on the results and the opening going forward. So I want to show some results for Q1, and this is only in Tennessee, and my perception in Tennessee from what I saw during the lockdown period. So this is Q1. Now Best Buy and Costco have little different Q1, so these are estimates based on looking at the data on a month-to-month basis. But Costco was extremely fast and extremely strict on locking down the number of people in their stores when COVID-19 came out. And we believe that had a big impact financially on them, at least in the short term. That may be perceived as very good going forward, but when you look at the data compared to Sam's was a little slower moving to that. We've had lines around the corner here for Costco to get in. I haven't yet had a line at Sam's to get into the Sam's store. So there's limitations on the number of people coming in there. Walmart, just a little slower than Costco in implementing those things, 10% same store sales there. The next one is Home Depot and Lowe's. The Home Depot where I'm at, if it's a Saturday, there's a line outside where they've been limiting the number of people. There's twice as a customer I've driven by, looked at the store and said, nope, I'm not going there today, and left. That's reflected in the difference that we see here between Home Depot and Lowe's. Lowe's wasn't as strict in our area letting people in, and they just kind of let the demand go through there. As a result, if that sticks nationwide, almost 5 points higher in terms of same-store sales for Q1, because during that peak of that rush and that buying, they were still open and others weren't. Target's middle of the road there. Best Buy, different format than the rest of these guys, but extremely strict on what they're doing. You can go into a Best Buy now only by appointment, still here where we are in Tennessee. So they've got the bump from everybody working from home, but nowhere near what, say, a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Target or Walmart got during that time period. So as we look to reopen, the speed at which you do that is a dramatic impact on things. So with that, I'm going to do, that's the last bit of mine before I turn it over to John. I'm going to go and share one more poll for you. And that poll, if you get ready to do that, is when do you plan to go to a sit-down restaurant? When do you plan to go to a sit-down restaurant? Give it another 6 seconds or so. All right, we'll close that and share those results with you. Here we go. So 8% already have. I would be in that 8%. We've been out 3 or 4 times here in Tennessee. That's been a blessing to go out there. 26% within 30 days, and sometime before September 1st for the next big group there. Really determines, once again, where you live and what the lockdown procedures are on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Very insightful, interesting. I made a lot of notes myself. Yeah, just a few things. Certainly the way we shop, some of this is a little redundant. It changes by day, but in terms of how close we all have been monitoring things, you know, the way we shop, you know, online shopping certainly prior to the outbreak was top of mind, but accelerated quite a bit in recent months. Whereas, you know, one example, normal digital commerce on average was about 20% across all sectors, but quick to accelerate caused digital to grow more than 30% last quarter, while weekly active users of things like activity apps and so forth shot up 80%. Speed was crucial then, before, always has been, but the laggards in retail and hospitality, some got a digital wake-up call with COVID. The next topic, next slide, please. Yeah, the way we work certainly has changed and there'll be some persistence involved. This picture really comes out of China. Just some examples of how an office space might look. You can see the black markings on the floor to kind of identify that distance that people need to stay outside of, as well as plexiglass dividers and things like that. But we're donating and borrowing from each other from a state perspective, as well as industry. So, you know, the healthcare industry is teaching us a lot, given some of the things that they found to work, such as, you know, workers being instructed to walk one way only. So a clockwise is the direction is the default. That's already applying to grocers and some of the essentials that have been able to stay open. We'll see it spread to others. And these are all, you know, it started out in the healthcare experts and medics navigating hospitals, is spreading to retail and malls. Sensors, for example, are replacing most of the shared surfaces that we used to touch. Instead of swiping an entry pass or punching a clock, for example, you might face a facial recognition camera or pull up a QR code on your phone. So like Ceridian, like Benny, we're investing heavily on touchless interactions that our customers and employees will be required to use. One of the biggest takeaways is we have to trust that when we go back, I think some of the responses are influenced, as Greg said, where you live and work and where you get your information. But I think it goes back also to, do we trust that we're going back to a healthy environment? And I'm going to return to that in just a minute. Companies are also expected to invest more in air filtration systems to reduce contaminations, and things like putting paper over the top of a point of sale system or a workstation and replacing it daily are some of the things that we're starting to see. And then we know with this GoToWebinar, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, video conferencing is way up 70% from prior use. And next, please. So what I wanted to drill into and unpack a little bit is when we think about the dimensions of change, you can break them down into three. There's more of a macroeconomic first column, second column a microeconomic, and then thirdly behavioral. And from a macroeconomic view, or regime break, as some talk about, it's governed and driven by fears of depression or inflation. But when you look at the data, neither one is supported. So when we look back at the Great Depression, that was a deflationary collapse driven by inaction and lack of policy. But today, with how we've responded, there's been, it's just the polar opposite. We've had massive efforts in both monetary and fiscal policies. So you can move the concerns of the macroeconomic view aside a little bit, and I'll explain why in a minute. The microeconomic view, the second column, is really about structural damage caused, and everyone's still guessing. What does that curve look like? Is it the full V curve that we've seen? Is it a V with a U tail? Is it a full U or a full L? And it's still to be determined, but the clearest way to plan is to focus on two main questions. Will we regain output at the level and path we expect? And secondly, will we regain growth and slope? However, what I thought was very important, and to me personally, it's the behavioral change that I think will impact and linger the longest, despite the economic data and municipal policies that will determine recovery. And the next slide, I just drill into some examples of that. When stores reopen, we've all seen the dimensions of service quality, and in essence, your brand has a promise to its target market, and that promise is based on three levels of service quality, and the degree to which you meet or exceed them, you fulfill your brand promise. But if there's gaps and you're hitting lower than the consumer expects, you're going to devalue your brand. And so I thought it was interesting when stores reopen, they're going to have that familiar whoosh of the air conditioning. I'm from Atlanta, so that's here now. And the polish on the floors and the sensation of not really knowing when to start, but beyond the doors, what's unfamiliar that's going to await us are the hand sanitizer dispensers scattered everywhere, employees smiling through their face masks, signs displaying checklists of what we're doing to keep you safe, and the signage and floor sets and plans for distancing. And the like, some of the things will be reduced. The close contact makeovers, perhaps bra fittings, etc., may be reduced. But the most basic thing that people are looking for in health and well-being is, am I going to be safe? And that said, the fact that people want to come to your place of business means they're going to buy, they're going to convert, they have made the effort, and they have the intention. But like upscale hotels and high-end department stores and others, the tangible, number one, and the insurance, number four. Before, cleaning, maintenance type work was a no-no when during your power hours and peak hours and business hours. Do it off hours because you don't want people to see that. But given this new next normal we're in, I believe that based on assurance, the only way to provide assurance, the knowledge that the retailer, a hotel, the restaurant, the quick serve are actually providing for your well-being, and it's going to be safe, and to convey trust and confidence in that is we're going to want to see more tangibles going on while we're there. So no more hiding, cleaning, and maintenance for customers. I think visibility offers assurance, and wary shoppers need assurance, and that starts the entrance and continues through to the exit. Next slide, please. Just a couple more, and I'll go right back to you, Greg. The shift in work and workers. How it will impact reboarding and onboarding from an attraction and retention and rehiring perspective. We're seeing a lot of data on that now, and it varies quite a bit. New layouts and new tasks to reassure safety and well-being will have to be taught. So learning management's going to kick in, and teaching the associates what the new normal is. And stores, restaurants, and others have already moved towards harmonized retail models, including being a greater link in the overall supply chain, like extended DCs and warehousing. But that will continue to grow. And of course, sourcing of goods will be even more important, especially in the millennial population, where more and more shoppers are going to want to know where their goods came from. How far did it travel to get to me? How is it handled along the way? It's not just, is it organic or not? It's really they're going to be, the consumer is going to be more interested in the whole journey from farm to table or farm to shelf. And the rise of associate engagement, it was something that retailers spoke about for many years, but sadly, only 2/3 have ever really invested in the self-service, for their associates. But I think that's going to be more important. As Greg mentioned, what are benefits? What's benefits eligibility going to look like? How are we going to assure that our high performers and the people we hire back, they may be looking at us going, hey, if this recoil hits in a month or two, you're just going to jettison me again, and they may be looking for a little bit more. And so what type of benefits? The other thing we launched at NRF was a pay experience report that we did at Ceridian with Hanover Research, and it really, one element was the majority, 70% or more, greater than 70% of retail workers were concerned and anxious about pay, just bills and finance in general, but the accuracy of their pay and access of their pay. And one thing that we've released at NRF was the Dayforce digital wallet, and a subsequent value derivative of that is the ability for anyone to download to their pay card, their Dayforce wallet card, what they've earned up to the point of a paired punch. So we know exactly, since we're continually processing payroll, what that net is. So there's no guesstimate. It is, you can see exactly what they've earned and access it immediately. Lastly, I just wanted to mention a few things that Ceridian has provided to the marketplace. There's first, there's a general information on COVID-19 that's offered to the public, just providing broader, this is for the public, not just customers, broader community information to manage through COVID-19. Secondly, Dayforce Learning Platform has been leveraged quite a bit with not only communication during the pandemic, but as we get back to work, what that looks like. Topics such as employee wellness, how to lead remote teams, work from home strategies and remote employees, as well as coronavirus preparedness and prevention going forward. And lastly, Dayforce employee safety monitoring. It's really, as people leaders, we need to ensure the safety of our employees while maintaining our business operations to the degree we can. And being able to have an effective tool to track employee location, their health status, contacts, helps you really map out and manage exposure to risk and communicate with speed and accuracy, especially as we come back to see if there's going to be a recoil or not. This is immediate information for executives and managers and people managers to see. But Greg, with that, back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So I did want to end this on some positive notes here, a little bit of things that we're seeing now that things are starting to turn away. We've gotten positive vaccine news this week. Certainly a long way to go. Sports is coming back, which has a huge impact on the psyche. Bundesliga in Germany is back. NASCAR has their second race tonight. Golf is starting back up. The Belmont Stakes is just been announced that they're going to run the third part of the Triple Crown first this year. That's on schedule for mid-June. States are opening for sports for the major league teams, for the pro sports. Even New York and California came aboard this week. And in college football, my favorite, the SEC announced they're bringing athletes back on June 1st. They're first because it just means more there. And my Buckeyes, June 8th, announced that they're bringing back athletes there. Airlines are announcing bookings increasing there for travel. Delta has announced that they're increasing the number of planes now so that no plane gets above 60%. In terms of filling there. And even the nightly news is starting to turn towards a more positive direction, which is a real change, a huge change from what we've seen for the last 2.5 months there. And we're seeing a bunch of little innovations that are coming out of necessity. I didn't put it in here for the sake of time, but look up the bumper tables. That they've created tables for outside bars that are made into bumper cars so that you have social distancing that are out there now. That was pretty funny. And I'm still waiting for the person who can create the produce bag that automatically opens by itself and inflates so you don't have to lick your fingers to do that. Whoever does that's going to make that's going to be the next fidget spinner out there. So particularly in technology, don't have time to go through all these if we're going to do questions, but we're seeing a significant drop in POS shipments on the negative side, primarily because the two biggest months for installs have been the months when we've been locked down and they haven't been able to get in there. Strong increases in mobile, self-service, contactless, voice being used, particularly for delivery, as well as in the stores for pickup. Label printers for labeling things for receipts, delivery, of course, a move away from cash. I don't know how permanent that is, but the contactless payment without cash. Changing store formats so that you can do more fulfillment from the store without clogging up the lines in the stores there, but smaller stores that have broader areas for distribution. We're certainly going to see a move to dark kitchens and multi-kitchen locations because the percentage of business that is delivery or outside of the store has gotten to a point to when you open that dining room, it's going to be very disruptive there. And that's a big one that we're going to do a paper on later this year about that. And then we're starting to see dark warehouses for the grocery stores. And that can be in the store itself where they're repurposing some of the space to just be a high volume for delivery area, once again, to keep those people that are pulling that Instacart and those folks from pulling the items from the store and blocking the aisles, but still being able to fulfill those particular orders. And with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A. Once again, go down to the Q&A. And wanted to invite you to our next webinar there. That's going to be the Coming Return Tsunami. That'll be on June 4th at 11 a.m. And with that, turn it over to Lee for questions.
Okay, right off the back, this was a question that we were expecting, and sure enough, it came through. 35% of the current unemployed are in the retail and hospitality industries. How much of that total do you think is going to come back?
John, do you want to take a shot at that, or do you want?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I saw something from CNBC, and it's just one source of many, but 8 in 10, nearly 8 in 10 unemployed American believes their layoffs are temporary, but the research suggests otherwise. And I think the University of Chicago Becker Friedman Institute predicted 42% of all jobs, doesn't break it down by retail, will become permanent. So we're still kind of guessing, Greg. I don't know if you had any other sources or not, but it's doesn't look like all. It looks like some of them will be permanent.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's in between from my end on that. There's no question we're going to continue to see store closings as a result of what the lockdowns and things had in play there. You know, and people are going to use that as an excuse to close stores. There, so those jobs may not come back, but with 300,000 stores closing, that in retail and hospitality, that's those jobs aren't coming back in those spaces. So that's a huge portion. So I'm expecting maybe 80% of those are going to come back, 75 to 80% there.
Okay. A couple real quick house cleaning type questions. Yes, you can receive the presentation and the recording. That's for Mariana. And Jeffrey asked about how many people were actually voting in the spot polls, and the totals were between 150 and 160 in each poll.
Yeah, and that's because I didn't want to wait longer for anybody else.
Yeah, yeah. Jeff Roster asked, the lockdown transfer slide is really troubling. Are you getting any interest from the press related to that point?
Well, Jeff, since it was finished about and calculated about an hour ago, this was the big unveiling of that. So it hasn't been presented to the press yet.
Regarding employees going back to the office, how much are you hearing about temperature/fever detection being important to employee confidence in going back to work, and also about customers walking into the stores?
Well, I think it varies dramatically whether it's a store or back to an office. I think most office folks are given the choice of working from home, or they're having structured days. Certain days they're allowed to go in there, and if there's any question, they won't go in. The retail stores, they're generally checking them when they come in that day for that. But I don't know if they'll be checking office workers to the same degree because they have the option to work from home.
Okay. This question comes from, I can't even read that name. Do we have a feel for the increase of e-commerce as a percent of total retail sales?
Yeah, you've got the answer to that.
Yeah, we had the conversation earlier today, and basically the numbers that we were looking at was just ballpark towards the fourth quarter for 2019. We were looking at approximately 17.4% of e-commerce of the folks we looked at. Now, understand these are public companies. And we're going by the information that they're presenting in their 10Ks and 10Qs. So Q4 of 2019 was 17.4%. Q1 of 2020 is 19.9%. So there is a bump, there is an increase, but our data is not yet complete. So I think it's a good indication of direction, but total quantity yet we're not quite sure on that.
Okay.
Let's see. Next question. What's the next time frame to update perspective about this content? Are you going to do it monthly, weekly? What's your feel there, Greg?
We're going to do it when we do webinars. We're probably, the next one is, which is on the screen now, June 4th will be the next one. So in about 2 weeks, that's basically what we've been doing, is every 2 weeks. I don't know if that's going to hold through the summer. It may, but it just depends on whether we put our next big research project after this, after returns, is out of stocks and overstocks and the impact on the inventory control there. We're targeting mid-July for that webinar right now, and there may be one in between that's sponsored, but you know, we may shift to a monthly update instead of every 2 weeks as we've been.
Okay. This is from Haley Bricado. I guess that's how you pronounce it. Sorry if I butchered your name.
Yeah.
The question is, what was the rationale between the curve of retail recovery lasting until 2023?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I highly recommend you go to our last webinar, Helly. If you go to our website, ihlservices.com, and you look at the replay there, we go into much more depth on the recovery there and the assumptions around that curve of things there. That assumes there's no second wave. It assumes different aspects of things that are part of that forecast going forward. The general belief that you're going to be able to get into retail stores, if you want to go into retail stores by July 31st, that we're going to have some sort of therapeutic or more data on severity and how to prevent things by the end of the summer, and we're going to learn to live with this worldwide as a result. So, but go to that, because I go into a lot of detail in that webinar and in those handouts.
Okay, this is from Amanda Miller. Are you seeing any retail innovations out of China or other countries that have opened up that could be leveraged in North America?
Well, John, I think John alluded to some there. John, did you have any more you wanted to add?
No, I just had that one reference earlier. If you want to, I know you've been tracking what's going on in China. Kind of give us a little bit of foresight on what we can expect.
Yeah, and to be transparent, I haven't gone through all those innovations yet regarding that. I know there are some that are in play there for sure, but I don't know what those are to be applied here.
I think the one thing that I recall reading was around the level of traffic that a lot of Chinese malls and retailers, and they're giving numbers around 70 to 80% current traffic versus pre-COVID traffic. So they're showing quite a bit of foot traffic recovery.
So John, I got a note that you got a question for me.
Yeah, I thought I'd violate all webinar protocol and backseat drive, but I've always watched, our industry, just the, margin pressures come from everywhere, and legislation doesn't really help us a whole lot. And I wanted to ask you what you think about, the information you provided about the shift. That if you had a bachelor's degree or greater, it didn't impact you as much, and then COVID kind of forced winners and losers across different sectors. Do you think we're going to see legislation coming out next year to try to somehow add false market pressures to prevent this in the future?
That's a good question. I doubt it, because we're still going to be recovering for things, and I think it really depends on the election, at least in terms of the U.S. Here, and also the fact that Amazon was as overwhelmed as anybody and had trouble fulfilling orders as well, so they didn't gobble up as much of that share as was in place otherwise. I don't think there's going to be as much pressure for that sort of legislation during this time when we're trying to recover things there. And then honestly, you have to point, where do you point the finger? You point the finger at Congress. Well, I guess they've done it before, but who caused this? The problems that are here. Well, Congress caused the problems that were here. You know, you could say COVID caused it, but our leaderships in Washington and the lockdowns and the governors, I mean, this was a government-driven thing that transferred this wealth, not a market-driven thing. It was the rules that were put in place that said that a local fashion store was not essential. That local restaurant was not essential, but that big box retailer was. So it wouldn't be the first time that government causes a problem and then causes more problems trying to fix that problem. But I don't expect it.
Next question. This comes from Amy Drum. Will state requirements in PPE, distancing, and other added costs push those retailers already on the edge from being able to reopen or stay open?
I don't think it's enough in and of itself there. I think the closures and the fact that the inventory issues and all that sort of stuff is more than enough if they're struggling. There's no question that the speed at which you had to put up, you know, barriers and plexiglass barriers and some of the PPE stuff is added expense at the time you least need it in some of these sectors. But I don't think that is enough in mass. I mean, it may for some, but I don't think that's enough in mass to make many go out of business. I think the bigger issue is you took small businesses for the most part and said you don't get 3 to 4 months worth of income. Sorry, and they were barely making it to begin with, and their expenses are much more than payroll, which is the only thing that they're getting money back for, that and rent. And when it comes to the larger guys, they generally were in a position to fail in most cases, and COVID just accelerated that failure for the most part. So yes, there will be some, but I don't think that to be a big issue there.
Yeah. This is from Cesar Bracco. Do you expect online grocery shopping to remain at elevated levels after COVID-19?
I do, but not to anywhere near the levels that we're seeing today. It may go up, it may double, but we're seeing 300 to 400% growth. And the reason I say that is because of the experience has not been good. Being able to find a slot, being able to get the things that you want without substitutions, it really has exposed the out of stock issues that grocery stores have beyond the essential items that everybody was trying to buy. But the fact that their inventory accuracy is horrible, and all retailers are for the most part. And that's why we do that report on inventory distortion. But I expect it to maybe double there long term. But if the experience would have been good, I think that would have helped. But it's not been good.
Okay. This comes from our friend Ricardo, and he's asking, are you looking at any consumer sentiment data to speak to new habits in buying via e-commerce for new product categories? That is, will consumers continue online, or will they return to the stores for those categories once stores open?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the last question. It goes together there. It hasn't been a good experience because of the supply chain and the overwhelming demand for specific categories. And then when you look at somebody like Amazon, who locked down certain categories that you couldn't even buy them, that experience just wasn't good. So I don't think is as much as you would think. So, you know, we had this huge increase in what we say, it was like from 13% to 18%. Of growth or something like that overall for the year, but I don't think much of that's gonna hold. Maybe 40%, 30% will hold, simply because the experience was not good. I mean,
Yeah.
people are still waiting for wipes and paper towels and toilet paper and stuff in some cases that they bought online.
Yep.
Yeah, Greg, the only thing I'd add to that is I think that applies to the buyer behavior, not just digital, but the brand. So, certainly if we're focused on experiential retail and people remember, like, who did I go to for what that was different? So a lot of people, shifted some of the buying that they did at their favorite, restaurant or grocery to a discount warehouse that were open, and maybe they'll continue some of that purchase there. But it'll be really interesting to see the digital persistence and the buyer brand preference persistence as well.
All right, here's the last question I've got on the list right now, Greg. It's about 11 after. For a quicker you'll love this one. For a quicker recovery, should the U.S. government give more money to individuals or strengthen PPP?
I'm going to take it off the board. I think for quicker recovery, we need to open faster. Because right now the issue is not so much a demand perspective. It is I can't be open to get it the way I need to be open. I think, honestly, the being open, a retail store being open for drive-through only for a fashion retailer is just ridiculous. For sporting goods, it's ridiculous. You're just not going to get much business there. To choose between the two, I would get the money to the individuals. The PPP has already been destroyed. I think one of the things they can do that Congress's intention was on the PPP is that would help the small businesses is allow for the expenses to still be deducted. What happened was right now the IRS interpreted the PPP loan as, hey, if you're getting this money to cover payroll, you can't deduct payroll from your taxes going forward. And so it was simply done as a wash. If they allowed that to be deducted, that allows that small business guy some room in cash flow going forward there. But I think the bigger thing that would do it is having demand, getting money into the hands of people, getting more people back to work, and letting them actually go to work and be at work is by far the biggest thing.
Yeah. That's it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Once again, here's mine and John's contact information, and the slides will be available tomorrow on the website. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.